Hi, I'm Creighton Kelly, Executive Director of IT at NCR. NCR has embarked on a transformational journey from a hardware company to an as-a-service company. The transformation was driven by the needs of our customers, the activities of consumers, and our desire to remain an industry leader by owning our future. We've faced many challenges and adversity during this time due to internal and external dynamics. Mohamed Massaquoi understands overcoming adversity and personal change. In the spring of 2017, his NFL career was cut short following a life-threatening ATV accident. It was in that moment he had to own his future and change his life going forward. As a fellow UGA graduate, it's my pleasure to introduce Mohamed as he shares his story and advice on transforming from NFL player to the founder of Vessol.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Inspire segment of the 2021 TAG Summit breakout sessions. I'm Kyle Tothill, CEO of Atlanta-based eHire and Vice Chair of the Technology Association of Georgia. Today we'll be discussing how dynamic and successful people overcome adversity and own their future. Our guest today is University of Georgia's great Mohamed Massaquoi. Say hello, Mohamed.
How you doing, Kyle? Pleasure to be here with you today.
So great and grateful to have you. Mohamed is the founder of Vessol, a strategic advisory firm that helps organizations deal with change, develop resiliency, embrace diversity and inclusion, and drive better performance through cultural change and adaptation. His clients include Truist, Home Depot, Biogen, Microsoft, and Cox family of companies, just to name a few. Most of you know Mohamed as University great football star. Most of you know him as the NFL star. But Mohamed's story is really a compelling story of dealing with adversity through a life-changing event. Now, I was first introduced to Mohamed as an Auburn fan. In 2005, Mohamed torched Auburn University, even though they lost that game for 108 yards as a freshman. And throughout his career, he bedeviled Auburn. And so I got to know Mohamed in the fan form and watching a great guy perform. Mohamed went on to graduate from Georgia with a psychology degree and then was drafted in the second round of the 2009 draft, played for the Cleveland Browns, and I think you racked up thousands of yards over your career, 5-year career. But what's interesting about Mohamed is in 2017, he had a life-changing event that heaped a ton of adversity on him and changed his life, in my opinion, for the better, even though it was a tragic, situation. Mohamed, why don't you tell us a little bit about that story?
Yeah, so like I said, Kyle, it's truly a pleasure to be here with you today. And for those that don't know, in 2017, I actually became an amputee where I got this interesting Luke Skywalker prosthetic device. And the significance of that, just to give you even more background story, I'm son of Liberian immigrants that escaped the Civil War. And so my hand allowed me to change the trajectory of my family, essentially, to get a scholarship and be the first person to graduate, to be able to go and play at the NFL, which only 1,600 people at any given time in the world do. And so even though I was retired at the time, the significance of losing something that's so essential to who you are, your identity, it stretches you to your capacity. And to have it happen in such a traumatic way where it's instantaneously. I think 2020 has showed us how quickly things can change for a lot of people. And if you make it through, like I was fortunate not to die in that accident and I have a tremendous amount of gratitude for life. But if you make it through what you've basically done, if you've been trained and you have the endurance and the resilience now, and so you have to do something with that. And that something should create opportunities for whatever your next chapter is. And for me, it was the birth of Vessol.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And talk about kind of where you got to, because you were a retired athlete at the time, and you were working for Morgan Stanley, if I remember correctly. And this happened to you, right? Take me through how people feel when something like this really hits you, that moment of realization that where you were is about to really change.
100%. And if I'm truly honest with you, as a retired athlete and landing at a phenomenal firm like Morgan Stanley, everything was very comfortable. And I think that when people are comfortable, it's very dangerous because you don't always have your antennas up for things that can go sideways. And literally when my, ATV went sideways, that's when you start to pull back and say, okay, how do I realign myself? But before you can realign yourself, you have to address the traumatic situation that you just went through. And so for me, I'm a big advocate of mental health. You lose a body part, that's not something that you just shake back from or you just get over. And so I still do, therapy. I still go and see a counselor. I still talk because I have this belief that mental health, your wellness in general, is tied to your capacity. If I'm not functioning at the right clip mentally and my body's fatigued, there's no way that I can do anything to perform at a high level in the space that I'm in. And so after addressing that, then I think it's time that you have to actually pull back and say, okay, where am I trying to align myself to? I'm not really a fan of multitasking and trying to have so many things in the fire at the same time, but what can you go deep and dive into and be intentional to, and then just go after it? And so you have to have the right mental space to know that I'm moving in the right direction. And then you have to have the endurance, the strength to continue on that journey.
That's interesting. During our conversations, and Mohammed and I have known each other for several years now, what I've learned is that dealing with adversity and owning your future is partly about science. There's a methodology to it. It doesn't happen by accident, right? And one of the things that you've really focused your time with me on is that long-term view. And I think there's a lot of types of adversity out there, right? There's physical adversity, there's the mental adversity, there is isolation, which I think a lot of us have suffered from. There is financial adversity. Certainly, a lot of people in this audience that are in business development deal with competitive adversity all the time, right? But there's a lot of ways to look at that when something tough happens to you, like what's happened to all of us, and thrusts our lives in a different direction very, very, very quickly. It seems like there are people that emerge from that, and then there are people that just get stuck. And what I want to share with the audience today, and what I want people to take away from this, is what are the things that they can do from a framework perspective to deal with that situation. And I think having that long-term view, right, and thinking about that framework is going to be very helpful for people to actually digest and process what's in front of them. So I'd like to hear more about that perspective.
Yeah, you don't create new skills in the moment of truth. And so if you're in a moment, you're really pulling from the work that you did prior to the moment occurring. And so I'm a big fan of preparation, like preparing for the unknown. And so if it's financially, do you have a reserve? If you know that you're going through some type of digital revolution, are you waiting till that revolution starts, or are you starting to upskill yourself? And so it's really the prep work prior to the event. When my accident happened, I ended up having 12 surgeries over the course of like a month and change. And the reason I was able to do that was the physical shape my body was in prior to arriving in the hospital. My doctor was confident that my body could withstand that type of trauma. And so when you start to think about it, like people are going into spaces that they haven't necessarily prepared either from a skill set standpoint, from a team dynamic standpoint. Do you have the right composition of people that are supporting you? Because none of us do anything meaningful in isolation. Do you have enough information about the space that you're going to, the prep work prior to the event? And then once the event actually happens, that's when autopilot kicks in, to where you're pulling off of these levers that you've already established to move forward with.
It sounds like a lot about confidence, and preparation creates confidence and creates the ability to deal with the situation. A lot of the time, people fear the worst.
Mhm.
And they think about the worst possible scenario, and they get trapped in that emotional cycle of just living in the past, or living in living in the moment and feeling despair. You talked about having that LTV, right? That long-term view of how things can work out. When you're faced with a situation, how do you coach others to look at the world?
Well, if you say, okay, I'm trying to make it through COVID, I'm trying to make it through this situation. A lot of times those situations are so big that that's when it becomes daunting. But I like to break things in a series of checkpoints to the thing. And so for me, I have an idea where I want to get to long term, but there's certain non-negotiable steps that I have to address before I get there. And so those checkpoints, in breaking them up, into these micro fractions, you can say, okay, I've hit this. And what that does is it creates momentum, because if you're just stalling out, that's when it becomes even more frustration. And that's when it becomes even more like, I can't do this, overcome it. But if I can track my progress to say, I've done this and I've done that, and I'm starting to close the gap to where it becomes a lot harder and takes a lot longer to go back than it does to just continue to move forward to the next checkpoint, then you, over time, you start to see and you look up and you're like, oh, wow, this is where I'm at a year from now, 2 years from now, not today's bad, tomorrow's bad, next week's bad, and you can't see out through the fog.
That's right. Yeah. And it's never too late, right? So I like that term, non-negotiable. And you're a very goal-oriented person and a person that's accomplished a lot, played at the very highest levels of sport. And now you're consulting at the highest levels with the biggest and greatest companies on the planet, right? And you're helping them do that. Talk to me about resolve and confidence and the non-negotiable pieces. What are your non-negotiables?
Well, if I've identified something that's important to me and then I don't follow through on that, I've basically failed myself. And so making excuses, needing external motivation, inspiration, whatever the case may be, those are really of no interest to me. It's the thing that I've identified that's important to me. And then how can I go do that? And sometimes I don't know how to go do that. And so I then have to go find the thing. I used to have a coach at Georgia said, if it's important to you, you'll make it happen. And it was like the most broad statement. And I'm like, Doc, what does that even mean? And what he's basically saying, like, if it's important to you, you're going to go figure it out. You're going to go talk to people. You're going to put the work in. You're going to do everything that you need to do. You're not going to need anybody to juice you up and gas you up. And so for me, there's certain things that I've identified and certain things that I want to do at a high level, because there's really no point in being mediocre, especially when you start to realize how valuable life is and how valuable time is. And so you're going for it, and you're going for it in areas that you're uniquely qualified to succeed. Whereas there's other people that you're more of a technologist than I am. And so if I try to play your game, I'm not going to succeed in there. If I'm trying to play another game, I'm not going to succeed in there. And so I've identified the things that I think I do at a high level that I can add value at, and I'm going all in on them. Sure.
You talked about upskilling as one of your key non-negotiables. For those people that aren't following you, you do have a Harvard degree, and you are currently, in school. And here you are, post-professional career, advancing your educational platform, right? Currently engaged in pursuing your master's degree in psychology from the University of Georgia. Why is upskilling so important during these times and really permanently for people?
I'll use a sports analogy and I'll make it make sense. And so I'm from Charlotte, and I went to the University of Georgia. When I got to the University of Georgia, there were far greater athletes on that team than there was on my high school team. And then when you start to play in competition across the SEC, you realize that there's even more competition. When you start to scale that out across all of college sports, there's more competition. And then when you get to the NFL, you see athletes that you've never seen before. And each year you continue to see athletes that you've never seen before. And so if you're not constantly putting the work in, there's another person that will eagerly take your spot. And so when you think about the business that we're in, where we have no idea, it's not just confined to 32 NFL teams. It's confined to every country in the world, every individual. And sometimes they have degrees from Ivy League schools. Sometimes they don't have anything, but they have other aspects that they're pulling on. And so if you're not continuing to improve yourself, somebody is eagerly going to take your spot, and they're going to want to take your spot. And so for me, I don't want that to happen. I want to make sure that any opportunity that I run up against, if I'm capable of doing it at a high level, that I don't lose out on it because of something that I could have controlled that I didn't control.
That's really interesting. A lot of our other conversations around this is dealing with change, right? So sometimes it's not always, I have a physical issue, or I'm having, a financial crisis. Sometimes it's more nuanced. The adversity is slower, to manifest itself, right? And you can start to feel isolated over time. You'd mentioned to me many times about the strength of other people. Talk to me about that and the perspectives of other folks, and why that's important.
We're human. We're finite individuals, and we're we're complex. And so if I stay and I wrestle in my own mind, I'm just going to miss things. I'm going to miss other perspectives. And I think that we have pieces of the puzzle, but we don't have every piece of the puzzle. And so I may run up against an issue that you have the answer to. And if we don't collaborate, and that could be anything, that could be mentally, that could be emotionally, that could be resource driven, like it literally could be anything. And so when you don't have dynamic people around you to fill in those gaps, you struggle. But if you have those dynamic people and they come from a diverse set of experiences, theoretically, you never are in a situation where you're at a disadvantage, no matter where you are in the world. If I'm in Paris and I have a plethora of Parisian friends that tell me how to navigate that situation, I'm gonna be so much more comfortable. If you just drop me in there, I'm out of my context. I don't speak the language. I don't know where to go. I don't know who to engage with. And so if you bring that back to the businesses that we're in, if you're having an issue in a certain area and you have a person that has a solution to that, like it would be irresponsible not to utilize that.
Yeah, a lot of people, especially now with the advent of social media and the adoption of kind of this echo chamber mindset that people have gotten themselves into, I do believe that that is an essential skill to overcoming adversity. I feel like people that surround themselves with, and use the word groupthink in our discussions, really miss out on obviously the richness of life. But more importantly, are ill-equipped to deal with hard realities that emerge and situations where people believe so wholeheartedly their point of view is right and others are wrong, and then all of a sudden, boom, it's not what it was. It's something that's different, and your beliefs are blown up, and you feel isolated. Talk to me about, how that manifests itself from a business perspective, and also, I'd love to hear that story about your dad.
You know, it's interesting. A lot of people don't actually know people. Like we actually, I've met you before. I've seen you before. We're not just we actually just connected on LinkedIn today.
I noticed.
And we've known each other for like 5 years. And so when it came time to make this happen, it wasn't like I'm talking to this random stranger. And I know you, so I'm more engaged. I trust you. What questions are coming, even though I don't even know like the flow of it. And so if you tell me, if we're talking and you're like, hey, this is going to come in hot, I'm not going to take offense to it because I know your heart. I know where it's coming from. But if we are kind of loosely connected, there's going to be friction there because people aren't intimate and they aren't truly connected. I think we have this misunderstanding that just because you have a lot of followers, you have like LinkedIn, people like your picture, that you actually know them, that if they pick up the call, they're going to respond. And so you actually have to know people in the physical form. But then what actually happens is when people are going through these challenges and they're trying to figure out different ways to look at things, there's certain things that they just haven't been exposed to that other people have that may seem innovative when in reality they're just taking it from one context to the other. And I told you the story about my dad who popped his Achilles playing soccer. And the doctor says, hey, Mr. Massaquoi, you just ruptured your Achilles. We have to go into surgery. And my dad's like, no, it doesn't work that way. He's like, Mr. Massaquoi, you don't understand. You just popped your Achilles. You have to get surgery. She's like, well, back in my home country of Liberia, we don't have all this modern medicine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie it a certain way. I'm going to wrap it. I'm going to do these, different procedures to it. And then I'm going to rehab it back myself. And I'll just come to you to get periodic checks. And so long story short, my dad basically rehabbed his own Achilles based off of what he saw growing up. And I'm sitting there talking to one of my neighbors who's a doctor. And he says, do you know that we're now just starting to look at these, alternative ways of doing non-invasive surgical procedures as it relates to certain, ligament damages or, body damages. And so this is something that's been done in different parts of the world for, 50, 60, 100 years, whatever the case may be, that seems innovative in a different context. And so as you start to work across different, people and cultures and demographics, you start to be able to absorb these different ways and infuse them in the way that you're doing things, and it creates great outcomes. It's not like you're trying to reinvent something. You're just taking it from one context to the other.
Yeah, it's so interesting because you can get so siloed in your point of view. You're doing work for one of the largest technology companies in the world, and you're helping them adapt to cultural change in other markets. And they have their way of doing business, but so do these other cultures, these global cultures that they're dealing with. And how do you coach them to be able to deal with that? What are the mechanisms associated with with teaching organizational open-mindedness? Because I can tell you that you hear the words in business: recipe. This is our way. This is the way we do things. This is how we beat the field. And the reality is the world is an evolving large place, and there's not always one way to do this. How do you coach organizations at that scale, right, to be able to adapt that way?
I mean, it's complex and multifaceted. At first, you have to strip out ego from progress. Because if I come to you and say, this is my way of doing it, I've just basically shut the door and told you that it is what it is, take it or leave it. But if I'm focused on progress and progressing in the things that make sense that my company stands for, if I'm in the space of automotives, of travel, and I'm trying to figure out how to make sure people can travel better, I want everything that helps me do that. And it's not to say that I'm going to accept everything. I actually want to know my options. And so what you're doing is you're presenting options on the table in a safe way where people can then see themselves and see the outcome. Because if I tell you, hey, Kyle, this is the way to do it, I'm smarter than you, basically is what I'm saying, you're going to be like, nah, not really. But if I can help you and transfer the ownership to where you can absorb it and the spark goes off for you and you can apply it in the way that you need to and you can make those connections, then that's when people start to say, okay, I actually want to go do more research on my own. I think that the interesting thing about sports is that each athlete is trying to develop themselves to plug back into the team at a high level. Whereas in business, you want individuals doing the same thing to where they're creating these sparks for themselves and they come back and they're injecting this back into the organization versus the organization saying, hey, we need you to do this. We need you to do this. Like, no, I'm going to go do this on my own. I'm going to go try to upskill and try to figure these things out and get as much information and learning of how I can stretch myself so that when the world actually does it in real time and I can't like call time out and try to stop it and figure out what's going on, I actually have to respond in the moment. I've already been stretched. I know my options and I'm not just pulling from the same, tool.
Yeah, there are no timeouts in business.
You get that call, you got to
I'm
respond.
aware of. We had a small timeout for about 2 weeks last year when everything shut down. But that was probably the only one in the history of modern business.
Exactly.
You talk about change like that and that perspective. Let's talk about it from the inverse perspective. So let's talk about something that a lot of people probably on this call have dealt with, which is acquisitions. And you have an organization that's coming to you, that's bought your organization or coming in to look at your process. And how do you communicate up to a person that has that point of view? How do you help someone else open their mind when they seem dogged? How do you approach that situation?
I mean, that's complex because sometimes these things take place prior to people even understanding like the true reasons why they're merging. And so when you see a merger take place, like hopefully it's done for the right reason and people are trying to find these points of synergies and sometimes they're artificial. And when that happens, it's a lot more difficult because the person that's just been acquired, they are trying to make something work you're trying to change them in a way that they don't want to be changed. And then it's not working. And so there's even more conflict. And so that's where it comes to alignment. Like we're trying to realign what the outcome is. And sometimes that changes based off of the information that we have at our disposal. And then you're trying to merge cultures together, not merge them into one and another, but you're really creating the best of whatever these two things are. And then from there, then you're like building whatever the next thing is that you're trying to do. And so it's really multifaceted in trying to figure out, okay, how can we all get on the same page of what we're trying to do? How can we bring the right people to the table? And how can we do that in a way that we're creating something new versus trying to hold on to like the legacy pieces that may or may not make sense moving forward?
That's a great answer. One of the things I've learned a lot from our conversations over the handful of years that we've known each other really is about taking stock and mindfulness about body and how that prepares you for performance, not just change, right? But to optimally perform. Today, when we were talking about this week and when we were planning and you're in the middle of some very big projects, and I know that you've got a ton of academic work that you're dealing with and you've got a busy life. You'd mentioned that, you take personal days and you take time to be restorative and to take stock. Talk to me about that technique and why that's so important.
So we did a call this morning at 6:30. And so if I'm up until 3 a.m., and then we go 6:30 and then we jump right back on at 9 a.m. I'm gonna be foggy. I'm gonna be fatigued. I'm human. I can drink coffee all I want, but if you stream too many of those days together, you're gonna become delusional in a certain sense. And I've been there where you're so involved and you're engaged, and you're gonna have moments like that where you have to go all in. But then you have to pull back and find some time to carve out. And if you have a family, the weekends sometimes are busier than the week because your kids are all over the place. And so then you have to like figure out, how am I intentional with my schedule so that I can recharge and I can take inventory of what's going on around me. Because if I'm so in the weeds, I'm missing the world go around me. And I think that's what happens to a lot of people. We're like, oh my God, the world's changing. And in actuality, it was just a natural evolution. It was just natural progress that you as an individual, you as a company missed. And so I try to take time, or there's days on my calendar right now that are blocked out, not because they're for anything. It's just time that I know that I'm gonna take for myself to be able to regroup and recharge.
Yeah, and that's something that obviously, as a top athlete, those organizations understand that. They understand peak physical performance, and they understand, that rest is important. You'd mentioned, a bye week and why that's so critical, and how much of an impact that makes on a late season fatigued, team. When you talk about organizations, I think managers and people have this mentality that it's grind all the time. And if I take time off, right, I'm going to be viewed as someone that's taking advantage of that. And just recently, last week, we saw that a major Fortune 50 corporation, started paying people $200 bonuses to take time off. Do you think that the world is learning, learning that lesson, and what can you share about athletics and why that matters, and to corporate side, and
So
how maybe we should do it, right? Because we all can't take the same day off.
So think about it like this. If on game day, I have to show up at peak performance because the other people that I'm competing against are at peak performance. And so if I'm below that, I set myself at a disadvantage. And I could have good performance that day, but if it's not peak performance, then I'm at a disadvantage because they're great on the other side as well. And so I think what's happened in business a lot is that people have plateaued into good performance, and they're just at a ceiling because they haven't actually recharged. And so when you give yourself a chance to come back and you refresh, you see things cleaner, you process information cleaner, you're more responsive to things, you see patterns differently. And it's unrealistic to tell a company that, hey, give all your employees off at the same time, but you stagger it around the same time to where, you may have a block go right now, then you may have another block go then, and depending on the size of the company, you may have to roll it out at different times. But that way, everybody comes back re-engaged at the same time. Because if they're not, there's tension. He's super fresh, and I'm like, my head is about to just like fall on the table, and you're asking me for something I just can't deliver on. And vice versa, I'm gonna be frustrated with you if you're not performing at my same level. And so I think it's important for companies to figure out blocks to where they can give their people strategic time off around the same time so that they can achieve peak performance and not, high performance.
Yeah, I've even heard some firms mandating it, and they're telling you, hey, you're taking the day off. And that's different now than it was 2 or 3 years ago. And I think COVID revealed that. That's a silver lining. A couple more topics here. Let's talk about finding opportunities in difficult situations. And obviously, the coronavirus pandemic has taught us a lot about adversity. The 2020 year was about as intense of a year as I can remember in general, with George Floyd and the social unrest, and then obviously a very contentious election. And then what happened after the election. It's been a pretty tough run. But smart people have taken advantage of it. You hear about it in the news all the day, the whole time. Talk to me about what the method is to look at a tough situation and see opportunities in it.
So I'll say it like this. I'm an athlete. I love performance. I love team dynamics. I love winning cultures. I also am fascinated with psychology and the way people perform and the science behind it. And so that hasn't changed. That's always been very unique to me. When I went to Morgan Stanley, that actually deviated from the things that were unique to me. And I think it was a great opportunity, great company. And I think sometimes when people look at opportunities, they deviate from the things that actually make sense to them, even when they're great opportunities. And then they get into it and they realize, this isn't actually the thing that I should be in. And so when my accident happened, what happened is I came back to the thing that I already wanted to do. And so now when you're back in the thing that you're wanting to do, you're starting to see opportunities different. And I had a situation, I was working with a consulting company and COVID started and they wanted to basically artificially manufacture revenue because they were not going to hit their goal. And I was like, listen, it's unrealistic that you get there this year. Like everybody's getting beat up. But if you pull back and you actually understand how you add value in different ways, these opportunities are naturally going to appear because other people are going to mess up. That's what you can guarantee, other people are going to mess up. And lo and behold, top 5 bank, they come out and they release an article in the Wall Street Journal that says, hey, we're firing some of the consultant firms that we work with. We spent between $1 billion and $1.5 billion. Didn't say that they were not going to spend that money because they still have things that they want to address. It just said that they were going to fire those consultant firms. And so naturally, when attrition happens, that just opens up the opportunity for someone else. And so you're strategically positioning yourself to when that natural attrition happens, when those natural things happen, that you're the person that steps into that opportunity. And so I'm not really of the belief that you have to go looking for it. You just have to be paying attention to what's already happening around you and step in it and be prepared to step in it once it appears and it's your time.
What's interesting is you step back and you're in the game. You understand that the game is a long-term game.
It's a long-term game
where there's adversity, there are opportunities. One of the other things I really want to close with this, and you're naturally an optimist, and no doubt I am as well. But you're also a very grateful person. You're very thankful. In a lot of the videos and conversations that were well documented about your accident, the very first thing you talk about is how thankful you were. And most people don't lose a limb or lose a hand, and that's the first thing out of their mouth. Most of the time, they're focused on, oh, woe is me, my life is disrupted, my situation is going to go worst possible case. How much of a role does gratitude play? And tell me about how that developed inside of you.
And so a lot of times the situation is bad. It's like losing a limb is painful. It's all of the above. And then you address it. That's why I started out with like the mental health piece. But if you look at your life for the most part, like I said, my parents escaped the Civil War. So just the fact that I'm here, I'm thankful for that. The fact that I didn't die in an accident, I'm thankful for that. When I was in the hospital, I kept hearing code blue, and I never spent extended time in the hospital. And the nurse would come in, draw my blood, let's say 3 p.m., 3 a.m. And I would ask, hey, what does code blue mean? And the nurse said, every time you hear that, somebody has passed away. And I'd walk around the hospital halls with my gown on and my IV. And I would look in a room that the day before had all this life, and then it would be cleaned out. And I started thinking, my great grandma lived until 95, 96. My grandma's in her 80s. She's rocking and rolling. My accident happened at 30. I could have another 65 years plus. And so am I going to consider the first 30 years of my life the best time, or am I going to do everything that I need to do and make sure that the next 60 plus years are the best? And so as you start to shift that, like, the better days are coming, there's better opportunities, and I'm going to work to do my part to make sure that I get there. You look forward to life. You look forward to waking up. You look forward to the things that you can go create. You don't have this woe is me attitude. And it's about taking control. It's not about being passive and just absorbing what happens to you. It's about saying, things have happened. Cool. I can't do it. I can't regrow fingers. So now I'm gonna just try to make sure I don't lose it more. Yeah.
One day.
And so we're gonna have a good time doing it, and we're gonna keep rocking and rolling.
That's awesome. I think there's a lot of great takeaways today, which is preparedness and upskilling and constantly focusing on advancing your skills helps you have confidence and the liquidity of being able to deal with tough events, whether that's financial, career, physical. Having that confidence is really key. And a lot of people pull up and they don't continue their education. They don't continue to invest in themselves. So investing in themselves is a good lesson from today. Taking stock and taking time to be restorative and planning to take rest so that you can perform better, not just to take rest for rest's sake. It's so that when you're on, you're really on, and you can go from good to great. I think that's really important.
Yeah. One thing. So I would say a lot of people define education just as formal education, and I would probably broaden that to say experiences. And so sometimes, like my dad had the experience of seeing how something happened, even though he had no formal education in medicine. And so broadening your experience as a part of your self-education in whatever that shape or capacity looks like. Sometimes it's formal, sometimes it's not.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I agree with that, because you're learning every day. I think what you're saying is it's mindset. It's all of the above. It's the full continuum of learning, right? Reading books, following people, listening to the right, podcasts, education, all of that, and being invested in yourself and your career growth is essential to being confident, right? And being open-minded. That's the other thing, is being open-minded and making sure that you're connected to other people. You can't isolate yourself and expect to do anything meaningful on your own. And you had mentioned that a lot, that, you don't win a football game by yourself, right? Talk to me a little bit about that concept.
And so this is what's interesting. Like, I think a lot of people look at life as like basketball. In basketball, you can have LeBron James like win you something, just because he's that dominant. But it's so complex, that it's 5 people on the field at any given time. We don't work in anything where it's just 5 competitors or, 5 people. And so it's probably more like a football team in terms of where Tom Brady in all his greatness doesn't become Tom Brady if he doesn't have a good defense, if he doesn't have a good offensive line, if he doesn't have a good kicker, if he doesn't have good everything around him. And I think that's the power of teams right there, where you can just surround yourself with people that can cover you and fill in. And it's, like I said, it's irresponsible to put yourself in isolation and think that you're going to do it all by yourself. It just doesn't make any sense. And so I actually welcome teams. I welcome someone to say, hey, this is coming in hot. You may not agree with it, but I think this is something that you should know. And then I can sit with it and say, yeah, that is something that I wanted to know, versus me going to do something crazy and then wishing someone had told me. You never want to be in a situation where you wish you would have known when somebody that could have told you before you did something crazy.
A wise man told me regret comes after years of inaction. You got to take action so that you can handle the life. One of our great callings as people is to deal with adversity, right? And overcome it. That's an inevitable fact. We're all going to deal with it. We all deal with it. And it's part of the human experience, and being prepared for that, as an individual is important, but as an organization, it's probably even more so. Right. And so the work that you're doing, serving others with your message, the lesson that you've learned, and you can apply those great high performance techniques and that mentality to the corporate world, is really making a difference. So I want to personally thank you for joining us and agreeing to be on the show today. I want to thank NCR for their sponsorship. I know you're close friends with them and have done work for them as well. And I'd like to thank all the viewers and members of TAG and all of our guests today for tuning in. It's been a really great experience, Mohamed. How can everybody get a hold of you? What's the best way?
So LinkedIn is easy. Just me and my dad have this name, I believe. So you'll either get in contact with him and he'll let you get in contact with me. Or
Achilles issue, you should call him, right?
Yeah. If you have soft tissue injury, call him. He thinks he's a better athlete still anyway. But yeah, LinkedIn is probably the easiest way. My website is thevessol.com. And so that's pretty easy as well to go on there.
Outstanding. Well, listen, I truly appreciate you, friend. And it's great advice that you gave the audience today. So I hope everybody had a great session, and look forward to seeing you guys soon.
All right. See you soon.